What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. With me, as always, is Pastor Leo. We are here to help you take a next step in your relationship with Jesus. We're so glad you're here. Hello, and welcome to the Grow Podcast, episode 110. Ooh, 110.
Wow.
Welcome, New Hope family. So glad that you are here with us. Pastor Leo, great to be here with you again.
Everyone?
Been a couple weeks since we recorded one of these.
Yes.
I've missed you.
Yeah.
Not only because you've been bringing food to the podcast, but also
you just missed the food.
I just missed the joy you bring to my life, and the food is part of that joy. I'm a little concerned. My beverage is almost gone. I should have slowed down before we got started because once again you have brought food, which I'm excited for. But
I have once again come bearing gifts.
Yeah, so I'm very excited. I'm even more excited, which is saying something because I love food, but even more excited to dive into the second half of Romans 4 today, which we're going to get to, which is going to be really great. But how have you been doing? I was gone the last few days. My wife and I got to take some time away up in the mountains.
Happy anniversary,
nice.
you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, we're old now. I've been old, but she's finally old with me now. Yeah, so that was fun. What have you been up to?
Well, I have been working.
Yeah, it's been hot here.
It has been hot.
And I thought I was going to escape that going into the mountains in Montana. And our last day in Big Sky, it was nice. It was like cloudy the whole time. Kind of got up to like mid 70s, but it was still unbearably hot the rest of the time. I don't enjoy it at all. Are you a hot weather person?
No.
That's why I like you, Leo.
I'm like a snowman.
I like if it could be like 60 and cloudy all the time, I'd be very happy.
Please.
Everyone else around me would be sad all the time, but I would be very happy. I don't feel like I get any joy from the sun being out. I just get warm.
You know that very old song from Garbage, I'm only happy when it rains?
Oh yeah, I do.
I'm one of those.
I'm with you. We should probably move to like Seattle.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll work on that. We're gonna launch a New Hope / PH Seattle that Leo and I will be spearheading.
Why not?
Which we're gonna be really busy because we're also planning Pagasa, Hawaii.
Right.
Which we're still working on.
But we know the district superintendent over there.
We do. That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. I don't think he likes me very much. Let us know in the comments if you are a hot weather person or a cold weather person or neither. Maybe you just like all weather.
Right.
Have you ever met somebody who's just, they're never comfortable? Like it's either too hot or it's too cold. There seems to never be like the happy place in the middle.
No, I know my mom is very hot. She likes it very hot. It's when it's unbearably hot for me, she's okay with it. That's when she says this weather is nice.
I feel like that's most of the people we work with here in the office. It's Karen and Hattie. That's when I am about to melt into a puddle, they're like, it's finally like just warm enough in here. I'm like, what are we doing? There's been a couple times where like Hattie and Karen have said like, oh, it's really hot in here today. I'm like, oh my word.
Wow.
It must be 120 degrees inside the office today. Well, what have we brought for us today, Pastor Leo?
Well,
before we jump into Romans
this
4.
one is not an Andy thing.
Oh, then I'm out.
Yeah.
Did you make it?
I was the one who cooked this. But
Michael, how do you feel about that? Michael is approving. So what is this called?
This one is called adobo.
Adobo.
This.
Oh my goodness!
If I'm not mistaken, it's like you guys' chili, where if you go to different places,
does not look like chili at all.
They have I know, but they have different ways of cooking chili here.
Okay, sure.
Is the way I understand it.
Yep, very much so.
Adobo is just like that in the Philippines, depending on what region you're in.
Completely different.
Right.
Okay.
Well, not really completely different, but there are
significant differences.
Like
if you get chili where Pastor Russ has moved, it's full of like cinnamon and it's sweet and it's weird.
Wow.
Yeah. Skyline. Okay. Shout out to Pastor Russ. I know he still listens every once in a while. And I actually have my 219 church shirt on underneath here.
Nice.
Look at that.
I need to get one of those.
Pastor Russ. But yeah, it smells very good. So explain to us what it is here. Michael, you better come and try some.
It's pork and chicken. This one, the one I made, it's pork and chicken. Some people make it using vegetables only. It's
very tender.
Right. It's it has it's in soy sauce and vinegar.
You're telling me this is pork?
That's pork.
Wow, that looks wonderful. Oh, there's potatoes in here too?
And potatoes.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah.
All right. Hi, Michael. Everybody say hi to Michael in the chat.
I can't get it. It's so tender.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible.
Right. So yeah, that is one of.
I need one more bite.
Okay. So that one's for the record.
Wow.
You saw like.
You're not gonna try the chicken?
Oh,
Go for it.
Yes.
You saw David reaching out for it. They were fighting over it now, and elbows will start flying very soon.
All right, Michael, go ahead. Oh my word,
That's wonderful.
that's very good.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the sauce on that?
It's made of soy sauce and vinegar. Those are the two staples of adobo. Most of them have soy sauce and vinegar. Depends on
for Michael,
which
if you're watching the
region
video.
you're coming from. There are some
Ooh.
that has very little soy sauce, or if I'm not mistaken, there are some parts of the Philippines where they have no soy sauce at all. So something like that.
So,
But, yeah.
how many foods would you say exist in the Philippines? Like, how many episodes are we going to get in before you run out of things to bring Rusty?
There's a lot. So yeah.
That's tremendous news. That's really good. I can't decide
Right.
if I like the chicken or the pork more.
That's that happens to be my daughter Alondra's favorite, one of her favorite dishes, and Andy's favorite dish too. The ones that I make.
Her favorite dish that you make,
Yes,
not her favorite dish that she makes.
not her favorite dish, but
That's really
favorite
good.
dish that I
Adobo.
make. Adobo.
Adobo. Big fan. Thumbs up. In other news, there's a Filipino restaurant moving to the town that we live
Yes.
in, which I'm not.
By the time this comes
not sad
out,
about.
they should already have moved. I just don't know
Okay.
if the restaurant has already opened by that time.
Okay.
But
very
since-
soon.
Right. And since they
Pretty
are
excited
moving
about
into town, I am talking with Karen and seeing if there is a possibility that they can sell food somewhere near New Hope.
Oh, like in my office.
Right.
That'd be great. Michael and I share an office, and I think I can speak for him that we would
Right.
both approve of that scenario.
They'll use the other corner of the
That was
room.
I'm in business.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That was delicious. Very much enjoyed. Thank you, Pastor
You're
Leo.
welcome.
Sharing food is a great way to grow a friendship. And I feel like we've gotten much closer since you started sharing food with me. So far, I've shared no food with you. But no, that was great. Well, adobo, I'm going to put it second.
Mm-hmm.
Behind the fried,
OKOI?
Yeah, okoi.
Mm-hmm.
Nailed it. But I mean,
Did
we've
you-
had a lot of winners so far.
Did you see Andy's comment?
I did. I did. I see Andy, I see all of your comments on you.
Right.
And all of the other ones too. And lately we've been, it's not every single episode, but most of the episodes we're hearing back from you guys. A lot of times it's about the food, but
Right.
hopefully more of what you're getting out of the Grow podcast is what we're going to jump into
That's
now, which is
true.
Romans. And we do love hearing your feedback as well.
Thank you,
So,
everyone, to those who have been commenting.
Yes.
We really appreciate
We
it.
do. And your feedback is important. It doesn't always have to be, like if there's something that we could be doing better,
Mhm.
let us know. This may shock all of you, but I am not perfect at podcasting.
What?
I know. It's hard. I know. Leo, it's okay. It's going to be
I
okay.
knew it.
So we would happily accept feedback. I'm going to just apologize to everybody at home. I'm going to open this beverage. I hope that wasn't
ASMR.
super loud. I should have opened that. Normally I would have done that before we started, but I didn't realize how little Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar I had left. So yeah, give us your feedback. We love hearing from you. We love that you join us every single week. And you get to kind of hear from us on here. So it's fun for us to kind of hear back from you
Right.
in those YouTube comments or whatever. And the more that you like the videos, comment, rate them if you're on one of the podcast services, the easier they are for people to find as well. So
That's true.
that also makes it really important to those things. Not just like random searches even, but if somebody goes in and they're like, okay, I'm looking for the Grow podcast, the more that video has been liked and commented on, the more just the easier it is, the quicker it comes up in somebody's search results.
The algorithm.
The all-seeing algorithm of
Yes.
YouTube. So thank you for all of your help with that. And yeah, I think it's time we should jump in.
Right.
So we're finishing up Romans chapter 4.
Mm-hmm.
We're into the second half of that. So kind of how we always start out here. Pastor Leo, why don't you walk us through just kind of the main ideas or points we should be focusing on as we read this.
Okay, so in verses 13 to 25, again, if this is the first time you're listening, go back to the other episodes. It's very helpful. It really helps for you to understand what we're talking about. But in verses 13 to 25 of chapter 4, Paul further explains how Abraham was declared by God to be in a right standing with him. And it's not because of what Abraham did, but because of his faith.
And Paul's, we're at the end of chapter 4, and he's been spending a lot of time on this idea, this whole concept in this letter to the Romans.
That's right. And if you go back, the episode immediately before this one, we have been talking about Abraham and why Paul used Abraham as his main example. But yeah, in verses 13 to 25, he goes further on why Abraham. And actually, that's the question: why Abraham? So
yeah. Go ahead.
So yeah, in this letter, Paul's idea, and one of the main reasons behind using Abraham is, and we talked about this again, episode 106, the Jewish believers in the church, and not just in Rome, they banked on their observance of Jewish practices and traditions. The more accurate they are in their observance,
sure,
the better it was for them. So it's not like how their heart is, it's how faithful they are in doing what they need to do as Jewish people.
Practicing
the practices and the traditions, right?
Yeah.
Like even if their hearts are not in it, and the same is true with many religious Christians today.
Yeah, for sure.
Even if our hearts are not in it, and that's why I mentioned last episode that this one hurt for me, because I was one of those. I was like that before. Like, I'll just do this, get it over with. That's another checkbox in my list of to-dos this week. I'm good. Moving on until the next time I need to do it again. So even if my heart is not aligned with what I'm doing, just because I did it, I feel better about it. And
we're going to touch a little bit on comparisons
later,
but I feel like this is an area that we use those comparisons as well, where, to justify ourselves just kind of going through the motions. We're like, well, look at that faith over there. Like we've talked a little bit about Catholicism before, and this is, again, it's not 100% of Catholics by any means, but a lot of times Catholicism is very focused on the traditions and the practices more than the relationship side of things. So we might look at be like, well, I might just be going through the motions, but that person's going through the motions more than I am. So therefore I'm okay. I'm not as bad as that one over there. And
that's true.
We lose the fact that, well, no, just because ours look different than theirs, just the Catholic Church has been around a lot longer, so their traditions are older, doesn't mean that we're not just going through the motions with the things that are comfortable for us in our faith as well.
That's true.
And again, we'll touch on comparisons more later, but that's even such today, a dangerous thing.
Even today, even if I consider myself as a follower of Jesus or a believer of Jesus, still have to catch myself from time to time. I have to do this. For example, something as simple, and that's the dangerous part. If it's common, if it's simple, you tend to do that easily. And it becomes a little bit too common for us. Like
praying before a meal.
That's something before you go to sleep.
I always struggle with that with my kids, because I'm I want them in the practice of thanking the Lord for the things that he gives them. But yeah, before the meal thing, like you can even just see it become a routine. Like, okay, let's pray, and then they, like just recite the 3 things that they're used to saying, and then
that's a good word
right
to
away.
recite.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, it can.
Right?
It can feel like that for sure. Yeah,
can feel like you're just reciting words that you have gotten used to.
Yep.
And once you get to that point, and that's when I start catching myself. When I get to the point where it sounds like it's a recital.
Sure.
Where you're reciting a poem rather than praying. That's when I remind myself you need to do something. Your heart needs to be at a different place rather than this. Yeah. So again, we talked about Abraham. Abraham was built different. Right? Because he did not bank on his observance. He banked on his faith in God's covenant. And that's one of the main reasons why Paul used Abraham as his example, because he banked only on his faith no matter what's happening. And yes, he messed up. Yes, there were times when he slipped and he did it his own way, but for the most part he banked on his covenant with God. And that's why, and that's one of the things that I always mention, especially when I'm talking at PH Church. God looks at our hearts. God looks at our hearts. He looks at the motivation behind why we're doing what we're doing. And the fact of the matter is, you can be the poster boy or girl of religiosity, whatever it is, whatever that looks like, right? But if your heart is not aligned with God's, and this is not me, this is not Pastor Leo, but Paul is very clear. If that's where we're at, that where we're doing what we're doing just because we need to do it, a Christian that does not make us.
Ooh, you said that like Yoda. Yeah. It made you sound smarter.
A Christian that does not make you.
How did I not know that Leo was, of course, going to say it in a Yoda accent? And then, so I want to jump into verse 15 here quick, right. Pastor Leo. Just the second half of the verse. Very interesting when Paul says, but there, I'm going to read it out of the ESV, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. Talk to us a little bit about that. I think that's a very interesting part of these verses.
Well, analogy time.
Ooh.
Well, how can a girl claim that I'm cheating on her if I'm not in any kind of relationship with her in the first place?
It's like a staple of the Grow podcast with both you and Pastor Mike that you pick just the weirdest or most aggressive examples of all time. But sure, that's a fair question, Leo.
Pastor Mike, you chose wisely.
Leo's on one today. I don't know what's in your little circle water bottle here. What flavor you have in there?
But yeah, it's true, right? If I'm not in any kind of relationship, you can't claim that I'm cheating on you. Because there's no relationship, there's no
rule to break.
Right? There's no rule to break. Yep. So if we're in a romantic relationship, especially marriage, then there will be rules. So that when it comes to our religious practices, religious observance, and traditions, and all of that, the same is true. But the problem is we tend to do several things. Number one, we focus on how many times we observe, and we talked about that. It's like I don't lie more than I lie. It's like it's a balancing act. The number of times I lied is less compared to the number of times that I didn't lie. That makes me an okay person.
Sure. Yeah.
We focus on how many times we obeyed. Number two is we use how many times you obeyed as leverage against how many times we disobeyed. We just showed that. And number three, we compare ourselves to those who have messed up more, right? And that's what you did earlier. It's like, look at that person. He's in a worse place than I am. So, especially by saying that what they did is a sin, right? What I did is not a sin. It's a mistake.
Yeah, that's a good little trick there, Pastor.
Right? Oh, that's not a sin. That was just a mistake. So
to clarify, Pastor Leo's not teaching you how to do
Right.
that. He's telling
So-
us that that's not good because that's brilliant.
That
It's
is
wrong, but it's
it is
brilliant.
wrong, but it's
Great
true.
way to lie
It's-
to yourself.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right, and
Yep.
and if we're honest with ourselves, we tell ourselves that line more often than we would like. That was not a sin. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll do a Tom Holland. You know that old song that goes, "I'm only human,
I do not.
born to make mistakes."
I do not know this one.
You don't know
I'm not
that
with
one?
you on that one. I'm sorry. I had you on
Michael,
the earlier
you know
one.
that one a
Michael,
little bit, yeah.
Michael says maybe.
I feel old. But anyway, yeah, that song is all about that. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's all about making mistakes, and that's what they say. I'm only human. I make mistakes. It's not a sin. It's a mistake. And so if we look at our hearts and our motivation behind it, we have to admit that that's just messed up. It's just messed up. It's like we're trying to guilt trip God. We're trying to put God on a guilt
Does
trip.
that work?
I don't know. I've tried it. It didn't work.
So far, it hasn't worked. Yeah.
Comment below if you made God
Yeah.
feel guilty.
Oh boy.
But yeah, it's like we're trying to put God on a guilt trip.
Sure.
Or we're trying to twist God's arm into letting us into heaven, which basically means that we're putting ourselves at a higher moral standpoint than God.
Yeah.
If we're really honest about it, if we do that, we're putting ourselves at a higher moral standard than God. It's like we're saying God's kicking me out because of what? A mistake? Then he's not a God, he's a tyrant. And that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I told you it's messed up. Or it's like we're hiding behind in our opinion, someone who's more messed up, or someone who, or we're gonna push them really into harm's way. Like, God, deal with that person, not me, because he's worse than I am. It's like God's in our minds, God's looking for someone to punish,
Sure.
and
okay.
then we're gonna hide behind someone who
Yeah.
we think is in a worse way than us, and then we're gonna push them right into God's eyesight and say, "Whoop, there you go."
Just like there's a beam of wrath coming out,
Right.
and we shove them in.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like, there you go. So not me, I'm safe. So it's,
Which
again,
that's probably not how we're thinking of it, right?
Mhm.
Like when we do that comparison thing. First of all, it's usually not like a conscious thing. We're like, okay,
Right.
now I'm going to take this time and compare myself to this person because they're worse than. But it's like it's almost natural, right? It's,
Right.
It's like being a little kid in school or in Sunday school or something, and like the teacher's mad, and you're like, I got to find someone who did something worse than I did to distract them from what I.
Right.
So it's like our natural instinct, like to push this blame off on somebody else. But we don't.
it's
really,
like you wrote on the walls, or you drew on the walls, and then the teacher is going to say, "Who did it?" And then you're going to say, "Look, he broke a toy."
yeah. But we don't really think about what that means to like how we're perceiving, God. Like you were talking about, we see him as like this tyrant who's just looking to punish somebody. So we're all right.
That's
Let's
right.
just sneak this person in, and then I'll be good. Like we don't really process what that comparison does to God when we're like, well, I'm not as bad as that person, so I'm okay. Like, well, what does that mean about God's character if that's actually how that worked?
That's true. That's true. And this is why Paul immediately says in verse 16 that it is our faith that saves us. It is our faith that saves us. Now, to clarify, God's mercy and grace, again, we have mercy and grace at PH. So, yeah, shout out to mercy and grace. But God's mercy and grace, giving us what we don't deserve, which is the right standing with God, and rather than what we deserve, which is the wages of sin is death, separated from God. God's mercy and grace, that is what saves all of us. That is God's side of the deal, quote unquote. Our faith in the fact that we have been graced by God of said right standing is our response, also known as our end of the deal. So God gives us the grace of the right standing with him, and our faith is our response to the grace that we have been given. Again, it's not just the I believe in 1 + 1 = 2 kind of belief. That's not the kind of belief that we're talking about. Paul, the kind of belief that we're talking about here is faith. the kind of belief that Abraham had in God's covenant. Whether or not I mess up, God will be faithful in his covenant. It's that kind of belief. So Paul also says that it is because of the fact that it is by grace, meaning we don't deserve it, that we can be, number one, we can be 100% sure, and we can have the absolute assurance that God will not keep it or will not take it away from us. And number two, it is applicable to everyone who believes. It is applicable to someone who believes, whether or not they have been practicing religious traditions and practices in the beginning, or someone who believes and they were not doing it at all before. So once you believe, once you put your faith in the fact that you have been graced by God with the right standing in his place or in his sight, then God if you fully believe in that, if you fully trust in that, if you fully have faith in that, then Paul says your heart is already in the right place.
And to the people reading this letter when Paul wrote it, that would have looked like basically like Jews and non-Jews, right? Like
right.
It doesn't matter if you are Jewish or if you're a Gentile. For us today, that probably more looks like, did you grow up in the church, or did you not grow up in the church? Have you been following Jesus since you were little, or did you not know about Jesus? Were you living, what we would perceive a sinful life,
yes.
Or were you, I grew up in the church doing all the right things, and I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't go with girls who do kind of mindset. That was Pastor Mike's line. He liked that one back in the day, but I don't think he invented it. But I just like to us today, it's much more in that. So I think so much when we read and we're like, okay, well, he's talking to the Jewish believers and the non-Jewish believers. Well, we still have a similar dynamic today. It's
true.
It's not necessarily tied to a Jewish background or a Gentile background. It's more tied to, did I grow up in the church or did I not grow up in the church? All of this stuff is still so applicable to us. It just looks a little bit different.
And we have heard people say it so many times that I am too far gone, that God's not going to take me in. So that includes you, and that also includes people. We have a saying in Tagalog, like, you are so religious that you're going to overshoot heaven. You're going to go past heaven.
I like that.
So
that's pretty good.
And that includes you as well.
Yep.
So it
includes the person in your life that you think is too far gone.
That's
true.
Like,
that I feel like that's the one that has hit me more often than not in my life. Like, I'll just be like, that person, I can't stand them, or I'm done with them, or they're just the worst. Even that person, like Paul's talking to in here,
yes,
they'll fall right.
In other
along
words,
with
he's
the rest of us,
addressing it to everyone.
Yep.
Surprisingly.
So
it's not just the Romans.
We get to verses, right? Isn't that weird? We get to verses 17 and 18. Paul starts talking about the power of the God that Abraham believed in.
That's right. Okay, so think about this. Number one, it took a miracle. It took a miracle, something supernatural beyond Abraham's control, to make Abraham the physical father of many nations. I mean, think about it. He was 100 years old by the time his son came out. God promised him a son. Isaac came when he was 100. It really took something supernatural. It was a miracle to make Abraham the father of many nations. And it also took a miracle for him to become the spiritual father of many nations. So God brought Sarah's dead, quote unquote, womb back to life. And in the same way, God can also bring us who are dead in our sins to new life in Jesus. And that's why we were talking about it just now. There's no such thing as I'm too far gone. So that's something to think about. And here's another thing to think about. Abraham's faith did not mean that he did nothing, and he just waited for God to put a baby inside Sarah's womb.
Yeah. I want to stop you there, and I want to tie this to what we were talking about earlier when we read the second half of verse 15. Excuse me.
Sure.
So again, verse 15: for the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. And then now you start talking about, like, Abraham's faith didn't mean that he did nothing, because a lot of the times that verse and other verses similar to verse 15 are used by people that basically say, as long as I believe or say them, the words or whatever, I can do whatever I want.
Right.
My actions no longer matter. I'm saved. And there's even there's like perversion of Christianity where it's the more you sin, the better it is, because that just allows more of God's grace to exist. Or
I've heard it the other way. Just because you believe that you're saved, this is for the uber religious and who think that their traditions matter. It's like, just because you're saved, that means you can do anything you want. You're okay.
Yeah.
That does not work.
Right.
So
that's why I think it's so important that we don't just read verse 15 where it says, where there is no law, there is no transgression. Then we go, well, I'm not under the law anymore because of Jesus, so I literally can't sin. I can do whatever I want. I'm going to ignore every other verse included
That's so
in here.
True.
But I know I've known people in my life that use verses like that in that way, and they it's not usually like, well, I'm going and murdering people, but it's the borderline stuff, right? It's the stuff that's like culturally okay, but might go against what we read in Scripture, and then they justify it.
Oh, the mistakes.
The mistakes that you were referencing earlier. But that's a great way to justify mistakes.
Right.
Taking verse 15 completely out of its context and just reading it on its own.
That's right.
I'm not under the law, therefore I cannot sin.
It's not a law anymore, so it's just a mistake.
Yeah, yeah. But then that's where this part comes in. So I wanted to bring us back to that because I just think that's such an important part of what we're talking about.
That's true.
The faith, faith without works is dead. And anyway, I know you're going to talk more about it, but I want to connect those two.
And it ties in too with the fact that God looks at our hearts. That's why He doesn't look at our actions, because if it's just actions, it's just the things that we do, then we can get by with so many things. So many things. And if we think about it, it's true. But God looks at our hearts, and that's why Abraham's faith did not mean that he did nothing. He still did something. He still had a hand in what needed to happen. And it's not like he was just sitting there. The boy is not Anakin Skywalker. The boy is not Jesus. He still had a hand. He still needed to do something. And our faith in God should be the same. Again, it's not yay, I'm no longer under the law. I can do anything that I want. It's also not I'll wait and see kind of faith. Like I want a good job, God, but I'm not going to study because I have faith in Jesus that He's going to give me a great job.
I'm not going to apply for any jobs.
I'm not going to apply for
my
any
dream job to be offered to me all on its own.
My job as a CEO will just fall right into my lap without me doing anything, or something like that. So it's not an I'll wait and see kind of faith. It's an everything I do with trust and reliance on God kind of faith. Like everything that I'm doing because I know that God is with me. God is for me. God will never be against me. God has promises in the Word, in the Bible, that is for me as well, and I can take hold of those promises because I believe in Him. I have faith in Him. That kind of faith. So James and Paul did not actually contradict one another. Faith which has no works is really a dead kind of faith because your heart is not in it. If your heart really is in it, then you will do your part. God's not gonna be working miracles in our favor, and then we're just sitting there waiting for it to happen.
And so it's more than just believing, right? Like the devil believes in God, right? He's very, very aware of the existence of God.
That is true.
So it's about having this faith that we're talking about, being fully convinced that what God has promised us, He will fulfill.
That's right.
So talk to us a little bit about that faith.
Well, sadly, this is why there are people who don't want to come to Jesus, or they don't want to go further with Him in their faith. They're not fully convinced that God will fulfill what He had promised.
Okay, can I stop you there? What about moments of doubt then? Like if I have moments of doubt, does that mean that I'm not really a follower of Christ, or I don't have faith?
Abraham had moments of doubt.
Right.
There are even times then he tried to do it his own way.
Yep.
That does not mean that he was not qualified anymore.
Yeah, and by no means were those in the Bible by accident.
Right.
Like this is the person that not only in the Old Testament, but then Paul Paul talks about him in Ephesians. He talks about him in Galatians. He talks about him in Romans.
Yes.
If you believe Paul wrote Hebrews, he talks about him in Hebrews. Like, this guy is one of the cornerstones of faith in God, maybe the cornerstone of believing in God as far as humans go.
Right.
And yet we have like a extremely clear recording of him losing, or maybe not losing his faith. Well, yeah, losing his faith in that moment, in that promise, and doubting and taking.
Like it's taking too long, so I'm just gonna do it my own way.
Yeah. So because I worry as we talk about we have to be fully convinced that God will fulfill what He's promised us, which we do need to be fully convinced of that. But then, we have those moments of doubt, and then we want to tear ourselves down, or we want to, that's when that lie comes back in from the enemy, where you're not good enough. You really think God would want you? You didn't even trust Him to fulfill His promise.
Or like, this just shows that you really are too far gone.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. But
so sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure we touched on that too.
It's great. It's great because those are great points, and people wrestle with those
big time
feelings, those ideas, those thoughts, those voices in their heads, in our heads, if we admit, like, that's something that we all wrestle with. But just because we doubt, just because there are times when we slip up, that does not mean that we are too far gone. That does not mean that God has already taken us off His list. God will redeem whatever we have, as long as we are ready, willing, and able to put it in His hands. So number one, they're not fully convinced, or they think that can't or won't work for me. We talked about that. Or we need to realize and see that this way of thinking is an attack on our faith, and that's why we were talking about it just now. It is an attack on our faith. It is the enemy trying to draw us away or further away from God, and this way of thinking must be rejected and surrendered to Jesus, and that's what we talked about just now. These are things that Abraham wrestled with. These are things that great people wrestle with. I mean, think of David. Think of the things that he did. Think of people like Samson. Think of people like even Peter. He denied, like, Jesus was right in front of him, and he denied Him like 3 times. And even his apostles, when he was arrested, they ran away. So it does not necessarily mean that just because you have faith, that because you're fully invested in your faith in God, that you're not going to slip up anymore. That's another lie of the enemy. Like, if you have faith in God, you will never slip up, and because you did, sorry, no, that's not it. So
that's usually not like there's one way or anything, but man, the enemy loves to just find those little things. Like we read Job and we think of just all the craziness that Job goes through, right? The devil just keeps attacking him with all this just horrifying, massive things. Or even, the temptation of Jesus in the desert, and it's kind of this standoff. But that's more often than not, like, our experience with the enemy trying to work in our lives is going to be those little lies, where he takes that little bit of truth, just like he did with Adam and Eve in the garden, right? That little bit of truth, and twist it, and try to send us, if we're on this path, just slightly off in the wrong direction. But as long as he can get us off that path, he knows eventually we'll get far enough off if we don't realign ourselves. And so we don't want you to
drivers know that to be true as well, right? Like, it seems like it's just a little bit off of the direction that you're supposed to go, but you go too far, you'll notice that you've lost sight of where you're supposed to be going. And I've heard this said before by someone, I can't remember right now, but one of the greatest weapons of the enemy is a magnifying glass. And what he does is just like, he sees those little things and he just magnifies it in your sight, and it looks like it's very big, but nothing's too big in the hands of our God. So bottom line here, the word faith is easily misunderstood, especially today, because it has been greatly misrepresented. And that's one of the things that we need to correct. The word faith did not necessarily mean that you just stop and do nothing. The word faith, we need to understand what that faith looks like, and what that faith looks like in action.
Mm-hmm.
And second, faith, real, genuine faith in God, is the only means through which salvation can be graced unto us. Faith, our real, genuine faith in God, is essential. So, things we need to wrestle with this week, and this will be in the
podcast notes.
Yep, podcast notes.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
The description.
Mm-hmm. So, number one, it's so very easy to say, but let's examine and ask ourselves if we really have surrendered to and have started to fully trust God. Have we done that? And then second, are we really living as people of faith? People who trust God and the promises He's made the way Abraham did. Number three, have we completely surrendered ourselves to God, as in all of our decisions and circumstances? And if number four, if not, what can you do to build up your faith so it can be like Abraham's? So yeah. And then next step would be Romans chapter 5.
1 through 11.
1 through 11.
1 through 11 for next week for episode 111. Thank you, Pastor Leo. Thanks to all of you. I know a lot of you have been really enjoying this study on Romans. A couple weeks ago, we had a ton of people joining us. So I hope that continues. I hope that you're sharing this with any friends that you have. It's been a really great Bible study through Romans that Pastor Leo is leading us through. So thank you for being here with us. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do that. Get notified when the new episodes go live. You might need to turn on notifications, especially on your phone, if you want to get those notifications. But subscribe to us on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We try to make it available as many places as possible. And we have people that listen on all of those, although some are more than others. Shout out to the very small handful of you who listen every single week on Spotify.
That's awesome.
We have a lot more people on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube, but I can see those numbers, and they're pretty consistent every week. So shout out to you. If you are one of those people, go on. I don't think there's any way for them to comment on Spotify. So go over to YouTube.
Well, they can comment, but we won't know.
Yeah, you can comment all you want. Just say it aloud in your car right now. No, go on to YouTube and let us know that you're one of the Spotify people, because I'm proud of you. I love Spotify myself. So,
Spotify
but yeah,
people.
lots of places for you to get it. Lots of places for you to be able to share it. So make sure that you do that, and then come back next week. Make sure you've read Romans 5, 1 through 11. Again, you don't have to have read to join us, but certainly you will get a lot more out of the study if you've read, rather than just listening to Pastor Leo talk about verses that you haven't read yet. So thank you. We love you, New Hope family, and we will see you next time.
Ingat.